My boss fired me after I closed a $20 million deal, so I pulled the plug and watched his empire collapse. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above my head as I sat in Marcus Thompson's office, the weight of accomplishment still fresh in my chest. The $20 million deal with Technova Corporation had been the culmination of 6 months of relentless work, late nights, early mornings, and countless strategy sessions that had pushed me to my limits. My fingers still bore the faint indentations from gripping my presentation materials too tightly during those crucial meetings. As I watched Marcus's face while he processed the news, I expected to see pride, maybe even a hint of admiration. Instead, his expression remained unreadable, his sharp cheekbones casting shadows across his face in the afternoon light. Marcus Thompson wasn't just any boss, he was the kind of executive who measured success not in achievements but in control. In the 3 years I'd worked at Thompson Enterprises, I'd learned to navigate his particular brand of leadership, equal parts brilliance and intimidation. He had built his empire through sheer force of will, acquiring companies and talent like pieces on a chessboard, always positioning himself 3 moves ahead. To him, employees were pawns to be moved strategically, their value determined by how well they served his vision rather than their individual contributions. As I waited for his response, memories flashed through my mind, the sleepless nights spent perfecting our pitch, the moments when I doubted myself only to push through anyway, the way Technova's executives had shaken my hand with genuine respect. This wasn't just a deal. It was validation of everything I'd worked toward since joining the company. Yet sitting across from Marcus now, I felt an unsettling shift in the atmosphere. Something about his silence seemed heavier than usual, more calculated, as if he were already several steps ahead in some plan I couldn't yet see. The office itself reflected Marcus's personality perfectly, sleek, modern furniture arranged with military precision, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline, and artwork carefully selected to project power rather than personal taste. It was a space designed to impress and intimidate, much like the man himself. As I adjusted my position in the leather chair, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass wall behind him, the professional woman who had climbed her way up through grit and determination, dressed in her best power suit, still glowing from the morning's victory. But Marcus's next words would shatter that moment of triumph, sending shockwaves through everything I thought I knew about loyalty, ambition, and the true cost of success. What happened in that office would become the catalyst for a transformation I never could have anticipated, turning my world upside down in ways both devastating and liberating. Little did I know that this meeting would mark the beginning of a journey that would redefine not just my career, but my entire understanding of power dynamics in the corporate world. The room seemed to shrink around me as Marcus finally broke his silence. "Emma," he began, his voice carrying that familiar edge of condescension, "while we appreciate your efforts on the Technova account, we've decided to part ways." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My hands instinctively gripped the arms of the chair as I struggled to process what he was saying. "Part ways? Marcus, I just secured one of the largest deals in company history. This makes no sense." His expression remained perfectly composed, almost bored, as he slid a termination letter across the desk. "Actually, it makes perfect sense. Your contract clearly states that all client relationships belong to the company. With Technova now firmly in our portfolio, we don't need you anymore." The cold calculation in his voice sent chills down my spine. "You're firing me immediately after I delivered such a significant win? That's insane." Marcus leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in that infuriatingly smug gesture I'd come to despise. "Don't be dramatic, Emma. Business is business. Besides, maintaining client relationships requires finesse you simply don't possess. Look at your track record, you burn bridges everywhere you go." His words landed like punches, each one more calculated than the last. "That's rich coming from someone whose reputation is built on stepping over people," I shot back, my voice rising despite my best efforts to maintain composure. He smirked, enjoying my reaction. "Careful, Emma. You wouldn't want to do anything that might jeopardize your severance package. We're being quite generous under the circumstances." The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. My mind raced through every interaction we'd had over the past 3 years, the subtle dismissals, the credit he'd taken for my ideas, the times he'd made me stay late while he left early. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. "You planned this from the start, didn't you?" I demanded, leaning forward until our faces were mere inches apart. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you assigned me the Technova account. You needed someone expendable to do the heavy lifting while you took all the glory. Marcus's smile widened, confirming my worst fears. Smart girl. Now pack your things and leave quietly. There's no need to make a scene. The rage inside me threatened to boil over, but something held me back, a flicker of recognition that this moment was bigger than just my pride or my career. As I rose from the chair, my legs surprisingly steady, I realized Marcus had underestimated me in the most fundamental way. He thought he was discarding a pawn, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail: pawns can become queens. And sometimes, they bring the whole board crashing down in the process. I walked out of Marcus's office with my head held high, though inside I felt like I'd been hollowed out. The hallway leading to my cubicle seemed longer than usual, each step echoing in the cavernous space of Thompson Enterprises headquarters. Colleagues who had once sought my advice on complex deals now avoided eye contact, their faces masks of awkward sympathy. My assistant, Sarah, stood waiting by my desk, her eyes red-rimmed. "Emma, I'm so sorry," she whispered, handing me a box she'd already started packing. "They told me to clear your personal items." The gesture struck me harder than I expected. Here was someone who had witnessed my daily struggles, celebrated my small victories, and helped me navigate the political minefield of corporate life. Her loyalty meant more than I could express in that moment, but I managed a tight smile and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." As I methodically packed the framed photos of my family, the motivational quotes I'd collected over the years, and the small cactus that had somehow survived my long hours away, I felt pieces of my identity slipping away with each item. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd sacrificed birthdays, holidays, and countless weekends to build Marcus's empire, only to be discarded like yesterday's trash. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from colleagues who suddenly remembered our coffee dates or lunch meetings, each message a reminder of connections that had felt genuine but now revealed themselves as transactional. I scrolled through them mechanically, deleting most without response. Only a handful merited replies, and even those felt hollow. When security arrived to escort me out, their presence felt more ceremonial than necessary. I recognized one of the guards, Mike, who always gave me a friendly nod in the mornings. Today, he avoided meeting my eyes, his discomfort palpable. As we rode the elevator down in silence, I stared at my reflection in the polished metal doors. The woman looking back at me appeared remarkably composed, considering everything that had just happened. But beneath that calm exterior churned a storm of emotions: anger, betrayal, humiliation, and something else I couldn't quite name yet. Walking through the lobby felt like moving through molasses. Every step drew attention: the receptionist who quickly looked away, the delivery guy who paused mid-stride, the janitor who stopped pretending to clean the windows. The automatic doors hissed open, releasing me into the bright afternoon sunlight. For a moment, I stood there, blinking against the glare, my box of belongings clutched tightly to my chest. The city bustled around me, indifferent to my private drama, its rhythm unchanged by my fall from grace. It should have felt liberating to be free of Marcus's toxic environment, but instead, I felt untethered, like a ship cut loose from its moorings. 3 years of my life, poured into a company that had used me up and spit me out without a second thought. The injustice of it burned in my chest, mingling with a growing realization that I'd been complicit in my own subjugation. I'd played by their rules, trusted the system, believed that hard work and dedication would be rewarded. How naive I'd been. As I wandered aimlessly through the streets, the box growing heavier with each step, I found myself drawn to the small park where I used to eat lunch during rare breaks. The bench where I'd often sat was vacant, inviting. Lowering myself onto the worn wood, I set the box beside me and let the tears come, hot, angry tears that blurred my vision and made my chest hitch. Passers-by probably thought I was just another office worker having a bad day, but this was so much more. This was grief for a version of myself that no longer existed, for dreams deferred and trust broken. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park. As my tears subsided, replaced by a strange numbness, I realized something fundamental had shifted within me. The Emma who had walked into Marcus's office that morning no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone stronger, angrier, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who understood that the system wasn't broken, it was working exactly as designed, grinding people like me into dust to serve the ambitions of men like Marcus Thompson. In that moment, sitting alone on a park bench with nothing but a box of office detritus and a burning sense of injustice, I made a decision. They thought they'd neutralized me, removed a potential threat to their empire. But they'd forgotten one crucial thing: revenge is a dish best served not just cold, but meticulously planned. And I had 3 years of intimate knowledge about every crack in Thompson Enterprises' foundation to work with. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a dimly lit corner of the Velvet Lounge, nursing a glass of red wine and watching the entrance. The establishment had changed little since my college days when I'd first met Detective Rachel Chun during a campus safety seminar. Back then, she'd been a young officer with a passion for justice and a knack for seeing through people's facades. Now, 15 years later, she commanded respect throughout the city's law enforcement community, known for her uncanny ability to connect dots others missed. Rachel entered precisely at 8:05 p.m., scanning the room with practiced efficiency before spotting me. Her dark hair was pulled back in its signature tight bun, and her tailored jacket spoke of someone who understood the importance of appearances. As she approached, I felt a flicker of nervousness. This wasn't just an old friend meeting for drinks. I was about to cross a line that would change everything. "Emma," she greeted, sliding into the booth opposite me. "It's been too long. You look different." "I feel different," I admitted, pushing the folder across the table. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she opened it, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Inside were documents I'd painstakingly gathered over the past fortnight, evidence of Marcus's questionable business practices, forged signatures on key contracts, and detailed accounts of how he'd systematically marginalized employees who posed any threat to his authority. "This is serious stuff," she murmured, flipping through the pages. "Where did you get all this?" "Years of observation and some strategic data collection," I replied, swirling my wine. "Before Marcus showed me the door, I made sure to secure copies of everything that came across my desk. Let's just say I developed a habit of backing up important files to a personal cloud service." Rachel raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. "That's smart thinking. Though technically illegal? Probably. But consider this, Marcus fired me immediately after I secured that massive deal. Classic case of eliminating witnesses after the fact." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Rachel, I know you've been investigating Thompson Enterprises for years. Last year's whistleblower case that got shut down? That was just the tip of the iceberg. I'm giving you enough ammunition to sink his entire operation." She closed the folder slowly, studying me with those sharp detective's eyes. "You understand what you're getting into, right? Once this goes public, there's no going back. Your career." I cut her off with a bitter laugh. "My career? Marcus already took care of that. What I'm offering you is leverage, proof of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and workplace violations that could bring down one of the city's biggest corporate players. All I ask is that you keep my involvement confidential until you're ready to move." Rachel tapped her fingers against the folder, weighing her options. "Officially, I can't promise anything. Unofficially." She paused, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Let's just say your timing couldn't be better. We've been building a case against Marcus for years, but we've always lacked concrete evidence. This." She gestured to the folder. "This changes everything." Reaching into her bag, she produced a burner phone. "New number. Call me directly if you remember anything else. And Emma? Be careful. People like Marcus don't stay on top by playing fair." As Rachel slipped away into the night, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the naive optimism of youth, but something darker, more determined. The kind of hope that fuels revolutions and topples empires. I finished my wine and signaled for the check, already planning my next moves. Marcus thought he'd eliminated his biggest threat, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail about pawns who reach the other side of the board. They don't just become queens, they rewrite the rules of the game entirely. The following morning, I found myself standing outside the unassuming office of Marcy Lin, tech guru and unofficial guardian angel of corporate refugees. Her reputation as a digital wizard preceded her, whispered about in hushed tones among those who'd been wronged by the system. The sign on her door read Lin Tech Solutions, but insiders knew her real specialty lay in extracting truth from encrypted systems and securing justice through code. As I entered, Marcy looked up from her workstation, her neon green glasses perched precariously on her nose. "You must be Emma," she said, motioning me toward a chair. "Rachel told me about your situation. Let's talk about how we can make Marcus regret ever crossing paths with you." Over the next week, Marcy became my shadowy ally in dismantling the digital fortress Marcus had built around his empire. Each evening, after spending my days gathering intelligence on Thompson Enterprises' operations, I would meet her in her office. Together, we mapped out the company's network vulnerabilities, identified weak points in their cybersecurity protocols, and developed strategies for accessing information that would prove invaluable to Rachel's investigation. Marcy's fingers flew across her keyboard with practiced precision, lines of code scrolling faster than my eyes could follow. Most CEOs think they're untouchable online, she explained one night, as we worked through takeout containers of Chinese food. They hide behind layers of firewalls and encryption, but they always leave a back door open for themselves. Human nature, really. Our late-night sessions yielded more than just technical expertise. Marcy introduced me to a hidden network of professionals who had been similarly betrayed by corporate greed. There was Daniel, the former CFO who had uncovered creative accounting practices that would make Enron blush, Priya, the IT specialist who maintained access to critical server logs, and Jamal, the facilities manager who knew every secret passage and surveillance blind spot in Thompson Enterprises building. Each had their reasons for wanting Marcus to fall, and each brought unique skills to our growing coalition. The complexity of our operation expanded beyond anything I'd initially imagined. We weren't just collecting evidence, we were building a comprehensive map of Marcus's empire, identifying every pressure point and vulnerability. Through encrypted channels and secure drop sites, information flowed between us, internal memos revealing illegal offshore accounts, audio recordings of board meetings where unethical decisions were made, and detailed financial records documenting years of systematic corruption. The scale of Marcus's transgressions astonished even Marcy, who had seen her share of corporate malfeasance. What surprised me most was how easily the pieces fell into place once we started connecting dots. Patterns emerged that had been invisible to isolated observers, the same shell companies appearing in different departments' records, recurring payments to mysterious consultants, and a web of interlocking directorships that created impenetrable layers of plausible deniability. It was like watching a masterfully constructed house of cards reveal itself, each card bearing Marcus's fingerprints. The realization that I had been operating within such a corrupt system for years filled me with equal parts anger and resolve. Our operation required meticulous planning and unwavering discipline. Communication occurred through encrypted apps and dead drops, meetings took place in constantly changing locations, and every action was documented multiple times for redundancy. We established fail-safe protocols in case anyone was compromised and developed contingency plans for every possible scenario. The level of coordination bordered on obsessive, but given what was at stake, none of us questioned the necessity of such precautions. As the weeks turned into months, our group dynamic evolved from cautious cooperation to something resembling genuine camaraderie. We shared meals during marathon research sessions, celebrated small victories with quiet cheers, and supported each other through moments of doubt and fear. Despite the darkness of our mission, these interactions reminded me of the power of human connection and shared purpose. We weren't just seeking revenge, we were fighting for something larger than ourselves: justice, accountability, and the chance to create a future where people like Marcus couldn't operate with impunity. The transformation within me was equally profound. Gone was the woman who had once sought approval from men like Marcus, who had measured her worth by corporate titles and corner offices. In her place stood someone who understood the true value of integrity, loyalty, and purpose. Each piece of evidence we uncovered, each vulnerability we identified, strengthened my resolve and clarified my vision for what needed to change. Marcus had thought he was eliminating a threat, but in reality, he had awakened a force far more powerful than any single person, the collective determination of those who refused to be silenced any longer. One crisp autumn morning, I found myself standing outside the unmarked building that housed the Securities and Exchange Commission's Special Investigations Unit. The file tucked under my arm contained the smoking gun, a series of emails between Marcus and several offshore entities detailing money laundering operations that funneled millions through dummy corporations. This wasn't just evidence of corporate malfeasance, it was proof of criminal activity that crossed international borders and implicated some of the city's most powerful figures. As I approached the entrance, my phone vibrated with an incoming message from Rachel. "Be careful. Marcus knows something's up. Increased security measures across all properties. Proceed with caution." My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to maintain my pace. Over the past months, we'd anticipated this moment, the point where Marcus would realize his carefully constructed empire was crumbling. What we hadn't predicted was how quickly he would mobilize his resources or how far he would go to protect his interests. Inside the SEC building, I handed the file to Agent Martinez, who had been coordinating with Rachel's team. His expression grew increasingly grave as he flipped through the documents. "Ms. Carter, do you understand the implications of what you're showing me?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Before I could respond, alarms blared through the building. Security personnel rushed past us, their radios crackling with reports of a coordinated cyber attack targeting multiple financial institutions. Marcy's warning messages flooded my phone. Thompson Enterprises servers were under siege, and our entire network was compromised. The speed with which events unfolded was dizzying. Within hours, news outlets reported widespread disruptions in banking systems across the city. Anonymous sources claimed responsibility, citing evidence of systemic corruption within major corporations. While the official narrative focused on external threats, I knew the truth. Marcus had activated his emergency protocols, using his influence to create chaos and cover his tracks. Our carefully laid plans were unraveling faster than we could adapt. Rachel's team went dark, their secure lines silent as investigators scrambled to contain the crisis. Marcy's safe houses were compromised one by one, forcing our allies into hiding. Even Daniel, who had maintained impeccable documentation of Marcus's financial crimes, disappeared after reporting unusual activity around his apartment. The network we'd spent months building was dissolving under pressure, leaving me isolated and vulnerable. Yet amidst the chaos, something remarkable began to emerge. Ordinary citizens, frustrated by years of unchecked corporate power, took to social media platforms that Marcus's countermeasures couldn't touch. Whistleblowers from other companies came forward with their own stories of exploitation and abuse. Former employees of Thompson Enterprises, emboldened by our initial revelations, started sharing their experiences publicly. The groundswell of outrage spread faster than Marcus's attempts to suppress it, creating a movement that transcended our original objectives. The isolation proved both terrifying and strangely liberating. Without the structure of our organized operation, I found myself relying on instincts honed during years of navigating corporate politics. Old contacts re-emerged, offering assistance in unexpected ways. A former colleague provided access to backup servers containing crucial financial records. A journalist I'd once helped with a story offered to run interference with the media. Even Mike, the security guard who had escorted me out of Thompson Enterprises, reached out with insider information about increased security measures at company properties. The landscape had shifted dramatically, forcing us to rethink our approach. Marcus's desperate attempts to maintain control had inadvertently exposed the extent of his influence and the lengths he would go to protect his interests. What had begun as a personal vendetta had transformed into something far greater, a reckoning for an entire system that prioritized profit over people. As I watched the city rally around the cause we had sparked, I realized that Marcus had made a fatal miscalculation. In trying to eliminate me, he had created exactly what he feared most, a movement that could no longer be controlled or contained. Each revelation seemed to trigger another cascade of consequences. Marcus's empire was cracking at its foundations, but the path forward remained uncertain. The question wasn't whether his empire would fall, that outcome now seemed inevitable, but what would rise from the ashes, and whether the sacrifices we were making would ultimately prove worthwhile. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself living in a state of constant vigilance, moving between safe houses and encrypted communication channels. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on my shoulders, not just for my own safety, but for everyone whose lives had become entangled in this escalating conflict. Rachel's updates arrived sporadically, each one painting a picture of increasing desperation within Thompson Enterprises' upper echelons. Board members were distancing themselves publicly, legal teams scrambled to contain the fallout, and key executives began disappearing from public view altogether. Yet despite the mounting pressure, Marcus remained eerily silent. No press releases, no damage control interviews, no public appearances. It was as if he had withdrawn completely, retreating to some inner sanctum while his empire crumbled around him. This uncharacteristic behavior gnawed at me, a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. The man who had always thrived on control and manipulation had seemingly vanished, leaving behind only rumors and speculation. Was he planning something even more drastic? Had he finally realized the depth of the hole he'd dug himself into? My reflections were interrupted by a series of cryptic messages from Marcy. The cyber attacks had intensified, targeting not just financial institutions but critical infrastructure across the city. Traffic lights malfunctioned, hospital systems experienced mysterious glitches, and emergency services struggled with overwhelmed communication networks. While the official narrative blamed foreign hackers and domestic extremists, our sources suggested a different reality. Marcus was executing a scorched earth policy, willing to destroy everything rather than lose control. The moral implications of our actions weighed heavily on me during those sleepless nights. We had set out to expose corruption and hold a powerful man accountable, but had we unleashed something far more dangerous? The movement we had sparked was growing beyond our control, attracting elements we had never intended to involve. Protesters clashed with police, conspiracy theories spread like wildfire, and opportunists exploited the chaos for their own gain. The line between justice and vengeance blurred with each passing day, forcing me to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of power and the price of revolution. In quieter moments, I found myself wondering about the aftermath. Assuming we succeeded in bringing Marcus down, and that was still a big assumption, what kind of world would emerge from the wreckage? Would we simply replace one corrupt system with another? Could the structures that allowed men like Marcus to thrive be fundamentally changed, or were they inherent to the very nature of corporate power? These philosophical musings felt almost indulgent given the immediate dangers we faced, yet they persisted, nagging at the edges of my consciousness. The emotional toll manifested in unexpected ways. Dreams of my old office haunted my sleep, morphing into nightmares where Marcus's empty chair loomed larger and larger until it consumed the entire room. During waking hours, I caught myself analyzing every interaction, questioning motives, and searching for hidden meanings. Trust, once shattered, proved difficult to rebuild, even among those who shared our cause. The paranoia that had once seemed irrational now felt like a necessary survival mechanism. Perhaps most challenging was the dawning realization that defeating Marcus wouldn't automatically validate my worth or restore what had been lost. The satisfaction of watching his empire collapse was tempered by the knowledge that my own career, friendships, and sense of security had been irrevocably altered. Revenge, I discovered, was a poor substitute for redemption. The woman who had marched into Marcus's office expecting recognition now understood that true empowerment couldn't be granted by others, it had to be claimed, regardless of external validation. As I monitored the unfolding crisis from yet another temporary safe house, I found myself reflecting on the cyclical nature of power. Marcus had risen by exploiting weaknesses in the system, only to become trapped by the very mechanisms he had mastered. Were we any different, using similar tactics to achieve our goals? The uncomfortable truth was that we had become mirror images of the system we sought to dismantle, employing secrecy, manipulation, and calculated risk-taking to pursue our vision of justice. This realization didn't diminish our cause, but it added layers of complexity to our struggle. The city itself seemed to pulse with tension, its streets alive with both hope and fear. Conversations in coffee shops turned to discussions of corporate reform and workers' rights. Social media platforms buzzed with debates about accountability and transparency. Yet beneath this surface-level engagement ran currents of anxiety and uncertainty. Small business owners worried about collateral damage from the financial sector's instability. Families debated whether to withdraw their savings or trust that the system would stabilize. Students protested university partnerships with corporations linked to Thompson Enterprises. Through it all, I maintained my watch, tracking developments while preparing for whatever came next. The movement we had initiated had taken on a life of its own, evolving beyond our initial objectives to challenge fundamental aspects of corporate culture and economic power structures. Whether this represented progress or merely a reshuffling of existing hierarchies remained to be seen. What was clear, however, was that we had reached a point of no return. The choices we made in the coming days would shape not just our immediate future, but potentially the direction of corporate accountability for generations to come. The unanswered questions continued to haunt me. Where was Marcus hiding? What final moves might he have planned? How far was he willing to go to protect his legacy? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of world would emerge from the ashes of his empire? As I prepared for what promised to be the final confrontation, these uncertainties swirled around me like storm clouds, promising both destruction and the possibility of renewal. The breaking point came on a cold December morning, when the city woke to find every digital billboard displaying the same message, the truth about Thompson Enterprises. Below those words scrolled an endless stream of documents, emails, and financial records, years of evidence that Marcus had thought safely buried. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, but its impact was immediate and devastating. News outlets scrambled to verify the authenticity of the leaks, while social media platforms lit up with reactions ranging from outrage to disbelief. I watched the chaos unfold from a small apartment in the city's industrial district, where I'd been laying low for weeks. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Rachel, Marcy, and various allies who had helped orchestrate this final maneuver. We hadn't planned this particular move. It seemed someone within Marcus's inner circle had finally broken. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, though it left me uneasy. Had we lost control of our own operation? The answer came later that afternoon, when Marcus himself appeared on every major news network simultaneously. Gone was the polished executive who had once commanded boardrooms with an iron fist. In his place stood a haggard man, his eyes bloodshot and his voice trembling. "I want to address these allegations directly," he began, but his carefully rehearsed statement quickly unraveled. As damning evidence continued to pour across screens worldwide, Marcus's composure shattered completely. He began rambling about betrayal, pointing fingers at former associates and board members, until his lawyers finally cut the feed. That night, as I sat alone in my safe house, my burner phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emma," came Marcus's voice, slurred and desperate. "You win. You've destroyed everything I built. But tell me, what happens now? What world do you think you're creating by tearing down mine?" His questions caught me off guard, not because they were unexpected, but because they mirrored my own doubts. Instead of responding, I hung up and activated the final phase of our plan. Through encrypted channels, I released the locations of offshore accounts containing millions meant for humanitarian efforts, funds Marcus had siphoned from charitable foundations over the years. I sent detailed instructions to investigative journalists about how to access hidden records documenting illegal activities. Most importantly, I provided comprehensive evidence to regulatory bodies showing exactly how Marcus had manipulated the system for decades. As dawn broke over the city, the full scope of Marcus's empire began to collapse. Board members resigned en masse, some issuing public apologies, others disappearing entirely. Law enforcement agencies coordinated raids on multiple properties, seizing documents and digital records. Former employees who had remained silent for years suddenly found their voices, adding their testimonies to the growing mountain of evidence against him. Yet amid the destruction, something remarkable began to emerge. The movement we had sparked evolved beyond mere corporate accountability. It became a catalyst for systemic change. New legislation proposed to increase transparency in corporate governance, whistleblower protection strengthened, and unprecedented public discourse about power dynamics in the workplace. The very foundations of how businesses operated were being questioned and reimagined. Rachel called me 2 days later, her voice uncharacteristically emotional. "They've arrested Marcus. All charges, fraud, money laundering, racketeering. The works." She paused, then added, "You should know, your name's coming up in investigations. Your involvement." Her warning hung in the air between us, but I felt only a strange sense of peace. Whatever consequences awaited me, they would be worth it. In the weeks that followed, I watched as the business world underwent seismic shifts. Companies began implementing real reforms, not just cosmetic changes. Employees spoke up about toxic work environments without fear of retaliation. Investors demanded ethical practices alongside profit margins. The revolution we had started transformed into evolution, slow, sometimes painful, but undeniably necessary. My own future remained uncertain. Legal proceedings would determine whether my methods of gathering evidence would be deemed acceptable. Career opportunities in traditional corporate settings likely wouldn't exist for me anymore. Yet as I walked through the city streets, now free to move without looking over my shoulder, I realized that none of that mattered. I had fought not for personal vindication, but for something far greater, the chance to create a world where people like Marcus couldn't thrive at others' expense. The final piece fell into place 6 months later, when I received an invitation to speak at a global conference on corporate ethics and accountability. Standing before an audience of executives, regulators, and activists, I shared not just my story, but the lessons learned through pain and perseverance. Power, I explained, wasn't something to be wielded recklessly or hoarded greedily. True strength lay in empowering others, in building systems that uplifted rather than exploited. As I concluded my speech, I noticed familiar faces in the crowd, Rachel nodding approvingly, Marcy giving me a thumbs up, even Sarah, my former assistant, smiling proudly from the back row. They represented everything I had fought for: justice, integrity, and the unwavering belief that positive change was possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Walking away from that stage, I understood something fundamental about the journey I had undertaken. It wasn't just about bringing down one corrupt executive or dismantling a single empire. It was about proving that individuals could challenge entrenched systems of power and win. That speaking truth to power wasn't just a noble ideal, but a necessary act of courage. And that sometimes, watching an empire collapse wasn't about destruction, it was about clearing space for something better to rise in its place. The city skyline stretched before me as I exited the conference center, no longer feeling like an outsider looking in. Instead, I saw possibilities: new companies founded on ethical principles, young professionals entering the workforce with different expectations, and a generation ready to demand accountability from those in power. The battle might have been won, but the war for true corporate reform would continue. And this time, I would be part of the solution, helping to shape a future where success wasn't measured solely by profit margins, but by the positive impact on people's lives. Turning my back on the glittering towers, I stepped into the bustling street, ready to write the next chapter of my story. One where power served purpose, where integrity mattered more than ambition, and where no one had to sacrifice their soul for professional success ever again.